These soldiers will need to put aside the ultimate sin. They will need to forget the fundamental moral rule.
A legend in his own mind, the man who wrote the book on killing, Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman.
These soldiers must now learn to kill a fellow human being. Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman is an Army expert on killing.
In the Army, every single one of our warriors are entrusted with the instruments of death, and there is no room for amateurs on this team. Because in this game, if you lose, you die.
Every species, every mammal has a powerful built-in resistance against killing their own kind. Animals with antlers and horns in their territorial and mating battles, they slam into each other head to head in the most harmless possible fashion, but against any other species, they go to the side, they'll gut and gore. Human beings, at that moment of truth, when we're scared to death, we slam head on into that resistance against killing our own kind.
Now you begin the process of orchestrating the instruments together in a symphony of death and destruction! Ready? Hold up! Ha!
Killing, even in battle, turns out to be far harder than ever imagined. It's a lesson learned from a unique study of the Battle of Gettysburg. Civil War soldiers were firing muzzle-loading muskets. They take 20 seconds to load, a split second to fire. After the battle, the quartermasters analyzed over 27,000 discarded muskets. Most should have been fired. So why were over 90%, 24,000, still loaded? And why were over 12,000 found with useless multiple loads?
A soldier will load his weapon, powder, ball, ram it home, bring it to his shoulder. At the moment of truth, he can't bring himself to pull the trigger. He brings the weapon back down again, he loads it up again, powder, ball, brings it to his shoulder, and again, at the moment of truth, he can't bring himself to pull the trigger. So the result is that we had all of these tens of thousands of muskets with multiple loads in the barrel, many with multiple loads. One was found with 23 loads all the way up the barrel.
Could it be that instead of trying to kill the enemy, a soldier would reload his weapon to appear busy? Reluctance to killing is a problem the military encountered again during World War II at the Battle of Iwo Jima.
I was second lieutenant within the second day and heard that my kid brother had been killed. So I started a survey around over through the platoons trying to find his body, going to bury him.
While Humphrey searches for his brother, he is able to witness platoon after platoon in action. What he sees shocks him.
I never saw a platoon where everybody was fighting, not one ever. And I saw one where there were 20 and nobody was fighting it. In my platoon of 7 of us, there were only 2 good shooters and I wasn't one of them.
At Iwo Jima, Humphrey discovers the secret of war. Bravery is mainly in the movies. The average soldier is so scared he doesn't fire his weapon.
That is so frightening to hear that explosion of those weapons. And it's the first time you see blood that people just panic and they hide instead of fighting.
These frightened soldiers also experience a strong resistance to killing, a psychological safety catch that keeps humans from destroying each other. In the heat of the battle, it is only a small fraction of the soldiers who do most of the killing. Ultimately, the flag is raised. For many, the flag symbolizes bravery. For Humphrey, it is a reminder of the secret of war.
The thing that shocked me most was a few men were doing all the fighting. And this was a stunner to me. It seemed like this was just almost too secret to tell about, you know, that there was this kind of a breakdown.
One soldier, SLA Marshall, did break the secret, and he had data to prove it. Marshall, an Army historian, invented a new way to study battle, the after-action interview. After talking to hundreds of soldiers, he came up with a startling statistic.
Only 15 to 20% of the riflemen who saw an enemy soldier would fire at that soldier. This is not a good thing, you know. A 15% firing rate among your infantrymen is like a 15% literacy rate among your librarians.
Marshall's 15% figure is controversial to this day. Veterans who risked their lives in combat were deeply offended, and historians questioned his battlefield studies. But for others, Marshall was dead on.
There was no doubt in my mind that SLA Marshall was telling the truth and that his statistics were good, and I don't care how he did his studies because I saw exactly the same thing.
The military had a problem. How do you get soldiers to overcome the reluctance to kill? Before Vietnam, the military adopted a systematic new way to train killers. It's still in use today.
If you assume the soldiers are there for a good cause and you're going to give them the very finest physical equipment you can, you've got to give them the finest psychological equipment you can.
Give it a dig. Get mad, dig in. Dig.
What we did was we gave our soldiers a psychological equivalent of an assault rifle. We turned around and developed a systematic process to turn the safety catch off in human beings.
To turn off the safety catch, the military turned not to technology, but to psychology. Behavioral scientists like Tony Nevin have learned how to bypass conscious thought and control behavior. It's called conditioning. Day after day, Nevin experiments with pigeons in these research chambers. In this simple demonstration, he trains a pigeon to peck at a red light.
When the red key turns on, then if he pecks at it 10 times, he gets an opportunity to eat, a food reward, a reinforcer as we call it. And we think of the red as the stimulus, the peck as the response, the food as the reinforcer. And because he's been trained for several hours with frequent reward, he becomes very persistent in doing it.
The light is the stimulus, the response is pecking, and the food is a tasty reward.
Locomotive 20-round magazine.
The Army has systematically adopted these same conditioning techniques.
Left side is ready. Right side is ready. Fire. Scan. Your sector.
Uncomfortable as it may seem, humans can be trained just like pigeons.
These individuals are learning rifle marksmanship, but it's more than just learning how to fire a rifle. What they're doing is they're learning how to respond to a stimulus that they'll actually find on the battlefield. The idea is that a man-shaped silhouette is popping up in their field of view. That's a conditioned stimulus. Conditioned response, you have a split second to engage that target. Stimulus feedback, when you hit the target drops. The targets are popping up more or less at random. As a target pops up, stimulus response, stimulus response, stimulus response. That kind of conditioning is absolutely vital to make sure that somebody will do the right thing on the battlefield.
In battle, when a man-shaped silhouette pops up, a well-conditioned soldier will act reflexively, automatically, without thinking.
Feel good about yourself.
Just like a pigeon.
Make sure you call Mom and Dad and tell them a great job you're doing.
Yes, sir.
In his lab, Nevin is studying the best way to condition birds. A key factor is reward. Watch what happens when he switches to a different reward schedule, signaled by the green light.
Now when the green key comes on, that's a signal that says to the pigeon that food is going to come at unpredictable times. Doesn't matter how many times he's pecked or how long he's gone without pecking, food will just be available for the first peck after some unpredictable time. Now look at the difference with the green key. His pecking is more sporadic. He turns away sometimes. He seems not to be anywhere nearly as interested in the green key.
The lesson for the Army is, if you want reliable action, you need frequent rewards and punishment. And that's one thing Army training is famous for. Punishment is given out in the harshest terms of the drill sergeant.
go! Let's go, Private, let's go, let's go! Let's go, flutter kick, roll over, hot crawl!
Yes, there is a scientific reason why drill sergeants yell so much.
Safety, dust cover. Let's go. Look left, look right, roll. Let's go right side.
And even the smallest rewards go a long way in the confines of basic training.
We have several different ways we can reward the soldier because this is such a controlled environment. You know, something like a simple usage of the phone or an opportunity to go to the PX just for a few hours just to get away from the monotony of everyday basic training can be utilized as a great motivator to not only do well, but to excel and even do better than well.
Okay, here we go.
The last step of the process is stress, simulated here by the flashing light. For the closer training is to reality, the stronger the conditioning.
When you pull the trigger, you got to shoot until you see tracer rounds, okay? Do it.
Do not, I say again, do not do a modified high crawl. Keep your buttocks low to the ground.
This is the most dangerous, stressful, and realistic basic training exercise. Tonight, in pitch black, these soldiers will crawl through a field as machine guns with live ammunition are fired directly above their heads. Flares illuminate the night sky. And as in combat, they all must freeze. Rounds explode to either side. The Army is creating the extreme stress of combat. Stress, stimulus, response, reward, punishment, behavioral conditioning. It all leads to taking the safety catch off, giving these soldiers the psychological equivalent of an assault weapon, and in the end, creating the ultimate killer.
That's the closest thing you're gonna get to combat. All right, y'all performed outstanding. Platoon, attention! Forward, forward! Go lip. Go lip.
Now, the veteran is not like a pigeon. He's a human being. He can talk to himself. He can feel remorse, and he will have to live with that remorse, and that's terrible. But the behavior of shooting a rifle at a target which looks like a human being and then later in combat is a human being can be established so well that essentially you short-circuit the process at which you might stop and say to yourself, should I really be doing this? Is this the right thing to do?
Started after World War II and perfected over time, the new science of military conditioning would get its first real test in Vietnam. Vietnam presented many different ways to kill: shooting from helicopters, infantry on the ground, interrogation, the ambush unit. The ambush unit would surveil an area for 4 days to pick the perfect site.
On the 5th day, we would go in and just lay in the kill zone there and wait for somebody to come into it and blow the ambush and then call for extraction and get out of there.
Would Ron Hart fire? He vividly remembers an early test.
Sweeping the kill zone, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a person laying there, and he moved like he was going to let off a hand grenade or something. I just turned, was real close to him, and shot him in the head then. It was just an awful sight.
When a man-shaped silhouette popped into view, he fired reflexively, just as he had been conditioned. The training had worked. Soldiers unleashed a frenzy of fire, 50,000 bullets for every kill. Marshall repeated his famous after-action interviews. He found the firing rate rose from 15% in World War II to over 90% in Vietnam. But a new problem arose. People with no inclination to kill were now killers.
It was hard, the first person I ever shot in the head, and see the results of it. No, it just kind of hard.
The Army had found a way to get people to kill, but they hadn't found a way to make people like it.
It's your job. I don't think you ever get in tune to it. I don't think there's ever any excitement in it, and I think it's a mission of survival.
We are now living with the aftermath of Vietnam. Conditioning may be one factor in the estimated 1 million cases of post-traumatic stress disorder. After Vietnam, the military had one more killing barrier to break. From a distance, killing is relatively easy. Bomber crews feel only a fraction of the psychological trauma of infantrymen, though they kill far more people.
3, 2, 1.
You can trace the resistance to killing across distance. From 20,000 feet, you don't look like anything. It's easy. As you get closer, it gets harder. From 500 meters with an anti-tank system, for instance, it's difficult, but hardly impossible. When you get closer with rifle fire, it's quite difficult. And by the time you turn around and move yourself into hand-to-hand combat range, actual physical bayonet range, it is literally impossible for an individual to bring himself to kill another individual.
Here at Camp Lejeune, Marines are tackling the ultimate killing barrier, hand-to-hand combat. For if one can learn to kill up close, one can kill at any range.
We carry M16A2 service rifles, and we need to be proficient with them. But if a man does not have a warrior's heart, those sights will not get aligned, and he will not have proper trigger control. No matter how many times you train him, if his heart is not that of a warrior, he will not be able to kill.
Master Sergeant Don Vito is teaching a new way to kill. He's going to get the body's muscles to take over from the mind.
Smooth is fast. Fast is not fast.
The first step is to teach basic technique.
The first technique that ends in death of the opponent in line 1, which is the base of the program, is the counter to the front choke attack. He's going to strike at the wrist and the elbow, breaking the arm at the elbow joint, which will force the person into what we call the inverted L position. What we have to do now is we must disorient him so we can eliminate his base and get him on his back. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to execute a kick to the face with the boot. We will then switch grips, and they are now in position to eliminate the base by executing a sweep. At this point in time, we want to drive the cutting edge of our heel onto the bridge of his nose to cause death. And that ends the technique. Stand by. Go.
But technique alone will not create the capacity to kill. So the heart of Don Vito's training is to physically ingrain the motions of killing.
Let's go, Team 2. You got the lead. Don't lose it now.
It will be repetition until exhaustion.
When two combatants engage in close combat, one of them is going to end up dead. I have gone to the Armed Forces Medical Examiner and checked medically and scientifically that these techniques are the most efficient way to kill a human.
As the Marines tire, they forget about the consequences and focus entirely on the action itself. Their muscles are being trained to act instinctively. It's called muscle memory.
We want to develop muscle memory in all of our techniques so that conscious thought is not needed.
Don Vito also uses reward and punishment.
You need to pick up the pace unless you want to do it again.
He makes the Marines compete against each other. The first team done doesn't have to do the entire drill all over again. It's a system that may create the ultimate killer.
You can heap skills, you can heap technology, you can heap weaponry on top of a coward, and that person's still a coward. But an unarmed warrior is always dangerous.
Perhaps too dangerous. Now that the military knows how to take the safety catch off, are we unleashing killers on society? Conditioning experts insist there are adequate safeguards.
You fire only under orders. And the key thing that's being learned is discipline. If you point the weapon in the wrong direction, you fire the weapon at the wrong time, horrific sanctions are brought down upon you, and nobody would even dream of ever doing anything inappropriate in that circumstance.
But with over 100,000 new soldiers trained to kill every year, what if even a few somehow escape the safeguards? If we want the best army, this may simply be the price we pay.
This is one of the really terrible things about the nature of human behavior. We can do this stuff. But once a person has received that kind of training, it's very, very difficult for them not to do what they have been trained to do. The best way to avoid killing is don't ever get into that situation.